Hello everyone, thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't fallen asleep yet, you might as well listen to this story, and maybe you will fall asleep soon. Before listening, please like and subscribe first. Of course, the premise is that you really like my content. If you have any thoughts or feelings, please leave a message below. Your opinions will really help me grow. Okay, enough chit-chat. Let's get started. At 5:17 in the morning, the iron gate of Vancouver Rose Manor was cut off by a cordon. The crystal chandelier in the underground wine cellar was covered in dust in the morning mist. Edward Ross's body was stuck straight between the oak wine cabinet and the long table, with a half-finished glass of red wine still clutched in his right hand. Detective Hawke, the rubber gloves of medical examiner Andrew, were stained with corpse stains. There are no external injuries, but there are burn marks on the oral mucosa. He lifted the dead man's loose lips, and the lavender liquid residue looked like a faded lip print. The initial speculation is poisoning, but the specific type. Claire Hawke squatted down, her nose almost touching the purple stain. She pulled out a portable test card from her briefcase. The fluorescent strip on the edge of the card instantly burst into a blinding red light when it came into contact with the liquid. 6 toxin reactions. 6. Andrew's pen stopped on the autopsy book, which one alone is not enough to cause a lethal dose. Yes. Claire pressed her knuckles against her chin. Memories of being in the Interpol toxicology lab 3 years ago flooding back. At that time, she compiled a database of more than 300 toxin mixed reactions. Someone is playing the buff stacking game. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Claire stood in the dining room of the main house. The 19th century walnut table was polished so well that it could reflect a person's reflection in it. The back of the main seat was carved with a rose totem. On the left was the seat for the eldest son, Lucas, and on the right was the seat for the second daughter, Emily. The seats had been fixed according to age for 30 years, and even the placement of the tableware was exactly the same. The surveillance footage has been retrieved. The young police officer handed over a USB flash drive. Claire pressed the play button, and Edward in the picture was wearing a dark gray suit and stirring the soup with a silver spoon.
20:05. Lucas passed the wine. She drew the first line in her notebook.
In the picture, a man in a silver gray shirt is shaking a decanter, and the wine creates amber ripples in the crystal glass. 20:12. Emily is serving soup. The woman with a low ponytail was holding a celadon soup bowl, and the handle of the spoon hit the edge of Edward's bowl, making a crisp sound. 20:27. Vivian will deliver dessert. Claire paused with her pen. The second daughter-in-law was a pharmacist. Is there any antidepressant residue in the tiramisu? 20:35. Margaret serves tea. Aunt's pearl earrings flashed, and the teacup was placed on Edward's right-hand side. 20:40. Ruth served the lamb chops. The cook's apron was stained with black pepper sauce, and Accompany mixed into the rosemary juice with the sound of knife and fork clashing. 20:50. Graham hand over the medicine. The family doctor's white coat was new, and he rolled the vitamin capsule in his palm. Contains a trace amount of anesthetic. Each person was only given 1 toxin. Claire stared at the surveillance timeline. The 6 toxins were like 6 thin needles. But when combined, Detective Hawke, the voice came from behind. Claire turned and ran into a pair of dark brown eyes. The man was wearing a baggy polo shirt, but the Patek Philippe on his wrist was dazzlingly bright. Lucas Ross, the eldest son of the Ross family. Do you have any idea about my father's death? He leaned against the doorframe, his tone nonchalant, but his fingers rubbed the seam of his pants. I heard that the autopsy report mentioned mixed toxin. Claire noticed his Adam's apple moving. Do you care about the time of death? Lucas smiled. It's a family dinner, after all. We can't let the murderer hide among the family. He took out a business card from his pocket. If you need to check fund flow or wine cellar records, feel free to contact me. The gold-stamped font on the business card still carries body temperature. Claire stared at the words Ross Overseas Fund. and suddenly remembered the anonymous email she received this morning. The fund account managed by Lucas transferred out 20 million Canadian dollars last month. The laboratory lights were turned on at 2 in the morning. Claire pushed the dessert residue into the gas chromatograph, and the peak graph on the screen made her pupils shrink. The citalopram component of the antidepressant had a record of reacting with the heavy metal solution in Emily's soup. Form Y2. She flipped through her notes from her Interpol days and paused on the page about toxic synergy. If Edward takes a certain drug for a long time, the phone vibrates at this moment. Detective Hawke, the intern's voice trembled. The Ross family's lawyer said that Edward changed his will last week and will announce it at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Claire grabbed her coat and walked out. As soon as she pushed open the laboratory door, she bumped into a shadow. "You'd better be careful." Lucas's voice was low and drunken. "Some people are more terrible than poison." He took 2 steps back, and the light from the corridor cut out light and dark on his face. For example, people who want to take secrets into the coffin. Claire watched his back disappear around the corner and took out the test card from her pocket. When Lucas handed her the business card, she had quietly rubbed his fingertips. There was a faint blue light at the edge of the card, which was a reaction to the datura extract. The fog outside the window grew thicker. Claire looked down at her watch. It was 3:17 in the morning. She remembered the video in the restaurant's surveillance camera. When Lucas handed over the red wine, the bottleneck of the decanter flashed in the light. Like some kind of hint, the Manor account book on the desk suddenly slipped off. Claire bent down to pick it up and saw that the words 1945 Petrus red wine inventory 3 bottles were written in cursive on the title page, but in the wine cellar register, that line of numbers was crossed out and changed to 0. She clutched the account book tightly and heard footsteps coming from the corridor. 3:18 in the morning. The footsteps disappeared at the end of the corridor. Claire clenched the account book until her knuckles turned white. The crossed-out 1945 Petrus Inventory Trero on the title page was like a wound, oozing out a bloody clue. The bottle of red wine worth $1 million appeared on the wine list for the last time at a family dinner. She turned to the second page of the account book, and the asset distribution table spread out like a spider web. The overseas fund belonged to Lucas. The art fund was managed by Emily. The jewelry studio was Margaret's. And the second daughter-in-law Vivian owned 3 chain pharmacies. The remarks column at the bottom reads, "All branch annual appropriations must be signed by Edward Ross." The phone vibrated on the desk. It was the dessert inspection report sent by the evidence department. The concentration of citalopram, an ingredient in antidepressants, was abnormal. Claire grabbed her coat and rushed to Rose Manor. The lights were on in the living room of the main house. Vivian leaned against the fireplace, her pearl earrings swaying slightly as she turned. She was holding a medicine bottle in her hand. The label was rubbed blurry. Detective Hawke. So late. Claire pulled out the test card. "Can I see your medication?" Vivian paused and handed it over. As soon as the test card touched the bottle, purple spots appeared. A neurotoxin reaction. "This is a sleeping aid I mixed myself." She tugged at her sleeves. Maybe some residue was left during the purification process. "Neurotoxins cannot be purified by ordinary methods." Claire interrupted her. "You are a pharmacist. You should know better than me." Vivian dug her nails into her palms. "My husband lately." She suddenly stopped talking and glanced at the family photo on the wall. In the photo, her second son was hugging her waist and smiling. There were footsteps in the corridor. Lucas stood in the doorway, his shirt collar slightly open. "Detective Hawke, the safe in my dad's study is open." The study curtains were closed. Lucas squatted in front of the safe and took out a yellowed letter. There was a wax seal on the edge of the letter, and it was signed by Edward's lawyer. Regarding the revision of Mr. Edward Ross's will, 80% of the estate is intended to be given to his illegitimate daughter, Irene Chen. "He contacted a lawyer last week," Lucas said with a rolling throat. The lawyer sent a letter to the manor the day before the family dinner. His eyes were red when he looked up. Please don't make it public now. Emily's art fund will be reviewed tomorrow, and Vivian's divorce agreement has not been finalized yet. Claire's fingertips pressed against the letter. How do you know the letter is in the safe? I made a copy of the key secretly. Lucas forced a bitter laugh. I've been cleaning up his mess since I was 16. At 5 in the morning, the clinic doorbell rang. Dr. Graham opened the door, sleepily, his white coat draped over the back of his chair. Detective Hawke, I have transferred Edward's case. Claire showed her ID. Regulator. The doctor's pupils shrank. The autopsy report mentioned anesthetic ingredients. Claire stared at his hands. And the main component of modulator is a pethidine derivative. Graham turned to get the medicine box, his voice tense as his back was turned to her. It's a vitamin supplement. The dosage is absolutely safe. The medicine box fell to the ground. Claire bent down to pick it up, and a prescription slipped out from the compartment. The dosage column at the bottom read, 3 times a day, 10 milligrams each time, while the standard dosage was twice a day, 5. Graham tried to grab it, but Claire dodged him. You misdiagnosed Edward's ex-wife, right? Claire recalled the old case in the file. His wife died of heart failure that year, and you actually prescribed the wrong blood pressure medication. The doctor's face turned pale instantly. 9 o'clock in the morning, jewelry studio. Margaret was wiping silver jewelry with a soft cloth, and on the shelf was a bottle of clear liquid. The label read, Thallium nitrate solution. Thallium is a common agent used to polish jewelry, she said without looking up. The police should check the kitchen. There is a carnitine in Ruth's spices. Claire walked over to the vent and put out her hand to test it. The wind was so weak that she could hardly feel it. This old-fashioned exhaust fan can't exhaust thallium vapor at all. She knocked over the toolbox when she turned around, and the silver chain rolled to Margaret's feet. You know that long-term exposure to low concentrations of thallium can cause chronic poisoning. Margaret's hand paused. You want to say that I deliberately poisoned Edward? I would say. Claire bent down to pick up the silver chain. You may have calculated correctly that trace amounts of thallium are not fatal, but combined with other things. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Laboratory. Claire spread out 6 toxin test reports. Datura, Lucas's red wine. Heavy metals, Emily's soup. Neurotoxins, Vivian's dessert. Thallium, Margaret's tea. Aconitine, Ruth's staple food. And anesthetics, Graham's medicine. She drew crossed arrows on the whiteboard. Datura inhibits nerve conduction. Heavy metals disrupt liver metabolism. Neurotoxins block synapses. Each one is like a brick, and the modulator that Edward has been taking for a long time is the final hammer. A surveillance video reminder suddenly popped up on the computer. Claire clicked on it and saw the kitchen scene retrieved from last night. As the camera swept across the workbench, she leaned in closer. As Ruth handled the spices, the little finger of her right hand twitched unnaturally, as if she was hiding some action. The fog outside the window has dissipated a little, but it has become colder. Claire took out the test cards. The last one was still unused. It was rubbed off. Ruth's apron. Claire's fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. The fluorescent lights in the monitoring room stung her eyes, but Ruth's movements on the screen were still like thin needles, pricking her nerves. When she replayed the kitchen surveillance footage for the 3rd time, she paused the footage. As Ruth bent over to cut spices, the little finger of her right hand trembled slightly every 30 seconds, as if she was pressing something. The camera zoomed in, and half of the phone screen could be seen sticking out of her apron pocket. It was on, with a blue light flashing, indicating a message. Ruth. The aroma of truffle sauce wafts from the kitchen. The old cook was putting a steak on a silver plate. When she heard the sound, her hand trembled and the steak slipped into the sauce. Detective? She wiped her hands so quickly that the string of her apron broke. Claire pulled out the evidence bag, and inside was a test card that she had rubbed off her apron. Concentration of aconitine exceeds the limit. Ruth's face turned pale instantly. Cell phone. Claire held out her hand. Ruth took a half step back and leaned her lower back against the operating table. The stainless steel dinner knife was at her side, the handle reflecting her trembling pupils.
My son, he owes a loan shark. She suddenly squatted down, and a stack of payment reminders fell out of her apron pocket. They said, if he can't pay it back, they will chop off his fingers.
Claire picked up the phone. The latest message was 3 days ago. Add 0.5 gram of aconitum powder to the spices, and the money will be in your account. I only added a little bit. Ruth grabbed Claire's trouser leg. I checked. 3 grams of aconitine is fatal. I only put in a fingernail-sized amount. Claire pulled her hand back. She remembered the aconitine content in the autopsy report. 4 p.m. Lucas's study. Edward's personal account statements were spread out on the solid wooden desk. Lucas's pen tip poked at a line of numbers. Last Wednesday, 2 million Canadian dollars was transferred to Graham's name. Why investigate this? Claire flipped through the printed paper. 3 days before my dad changed his will, he suddenly started checking the family accounts. Lucas loosened his tie. He suspected someone had embezzled public funds, but it was me. He suddenly laughed. So I had to find evidence against him first. Claire stared at the transfer note. Medical consultation fee. Graham's clinic only makes $500,000 a year in profit. Lucas pushed the USB drive over. In the surveillance video, his hands were shaking when he handed the medicine to my dad, and he even frowned before swallowing the medicine. The fume hood in the laboratory hummed. Claire pinched the cork of the red wine bottle and turned the test cotton swab around the bottle mouth 3 times. Datura extract. She held up the color card, the purple lines like a withered flower. It has a slight reaction with heavy metal solutions. When you handed over the wine, the soup was already on the table. Lucas leaned against the door frame, his gold-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. I bought the mandala to soak the wine in the wine cellar. He pulled his sleeves, revealing the old scar on his wrist. My mother likes the mandala, saying it looks like the veil she wore at her wedding. So you didn't add it to the drink? I added it. Lucas suddenly stood up straight, but only 1 drop. He took out his phone and looked up the shopping records. I bought it on the black market. The purity is 3%, and 1 drop is at most. Claire frowned. Datura inhibits nerve conduction and slows down metabolism. I know. Lucas lowered his voice. That's why I only added 1 drop. Emily's studio smells of turpentine. She pushed the tablet over to me. On the screen was an anonymous email. I have the transfer records of the embezzled funds. Prepare 3 million. I didn't embezzle the funds. Emily twirled her palette knife. My dad told me to give the fund to that rubbish artist. She suddenly dropped the palette knife. I put too much heavy metal solution in the soup. I only poured half an extra tube. Claire picked up the test report. The heavy metal content is 0.3 megagram, which is not fatal on its own. He deserves it. Emily's tears fell on the tablet. He said he would withdraw the art fund, and said my curatorial work was rubbish. I just wanted him to stay in the hospital for 2 days. Graham's office smelled of Lysol. When Claire opened the bottom drawer, a yellowed medical record slid out. The death record of Edward's ex-wife in misdiagnosis. She turned to the doctor's instructions page. The antihypertensive drug was prescribed as a diuretic. Graham leaned against the window, his shadow stretched long by the setting sun. He found out. He fished out the medicine bottle from the pocket of his white coat. He said he would make my medical records public and ruin my reputation.
So you're putting anesthetics in your vitamins?
Pethidine derivatives. Graham unscrewed the bottle and scattered white pills on the table. An extra 5 milligram a day will help stabilize his mood. I checked it. It's a safe dose, but it's superimposed with other toxins. Claire picked up a pill. Datura slows down metabolism. Heavy metals damage the liver, and aconitine attacks the heart. I don't know, Graham suddenly collapsed. I just want to. As night fell into Rose Manor, Claire stood in the middle of the restaurant. There were still 6 cups on the long table. The rim of the red wine glass was the purple of mandala. The bottom of the soup bowl was the gray of heavy metal, and the teacup was filled with the white of thallium. She took out the test cards and pressed them on the rim of the cup one by one. 6 colors spread out on the card like a cloudy fog. Someone is coughing outside the window. Claire looked up and saw Lucas standing under the grape arbor, holding a half bottle of 1945 Petrus in his hand, the same one Edward drank that night. Do you want to check the dinner schedule again? He raised the bottle of wine. Claire said nothing. She stared at the 6 cups and suddenly remembered Ruth's tears, Emily's screams, and Graham's trembling. They each added just a drop of water, but when 6 drops of water fall into the same lake, she took out her cell phone and dialed the manor housekeeper's number. Call up the restaurant surveillance, starting at 5. The night wind blew up the grape leaves and hit the window glass, like someone knocking. Claire spread out 6 Ziploc bags on the long table. Wine glasses, soup bowls, dessert plates, teacups, dinner plates, and medicine boxes were lined up in the order of the evening. She took out the test card from the pocket of her white coat, picked up the remnant on the rim of the red wine glass with metal tweezers, and gently pressed it on the first grid of the card. Purple spreads. Datura. Extract. 0.2 mg. Her voice was like a scalpel. Lucas added it when he handed me the wine. The ash stain at the bottom of the soup bowl fell into the second compartment. Heavy metal solution. 0.3 mg. She looked up at Emily. You said half a tube more. The brown mark on the edge of the dessert plate is the 3rd box. Antidepressant residue. Near 0.1. Vivian twisted her wedding ring with her fingers. Pharmacists should know the metabolic cycle. The white mark on the inside of the teacup turned blue in the 4th compartment. Thallium. 0.05 millicos. Margaret shook her pearl earrings. The amount of jewelry polish. The dark green on the edge of the plate is the 5th grid. Aconitine. 0 pint. Ruth's apron corners trembled. From the spice jar, the last box was filled with powder from the inside of the medicine box. Pethidine derivative. 5 million rides. Graham's Adam's apple moved. It's mixed in vitamins. The test card was spread out in front of the 6 people, and the 6 colors were entangled into a turbid purple. Neither of them is fatal alone. Claire pulled out Edward's medical records. But you overlooked his medicine. The medical record flipped to the last page. Regulator. A combination drug prescribed by Dr. Graham to stabilize blood pressure and mood. She tapped the prescription record. Long-term use will inhibit liver metabolic enzymes. Datura slows down gastrointestinal motility. Heavy metals damage liver cells. And pethidine inhibits enzyme activity. 6 kinds of toxins entered his body at the same time. She ran her fingertips across the test card. They can't be excreted. The restaurant was so quiet that you could hear the ticking of the clock. So each of you thinks you only threw a small stone. Claire glanced at everyone. And it killed someone. Vivian stood up suddenly. I put antidepressants in the dessert because Andrew cheated on me. She pulled the necklace. I wanted Dad to see him go crazy and sympathize with me.
I didn't want him to die. Emily clutched the tablet tightly. The blackmail email said there was a fund transfer record, but that was what my father asked me to transfer to the artist.
I put too much heavy metal in it, and wanted him to be hospitalized for further investigation. Margaret pushed the teacup in front of her. Thallium is necessary for polishing jewelry. I admit that I deliberately moved the teacup closer to him that day. She lowered her voice. I wanted him to know that the jewelry studio can survive without him. Ruth suddenly covered her face and cried. The loan shark said he would break Sharkai's legs if he didn't pay back the money. She sobbed. I sprinkled aconitine in the staple food, hoping to make the master have a stomachache for a few days so that I could ask him for an advance on my salary. Lucas suddenly laughed. I added datura to the red wine to make him dizzy and delay the signing of the will. He pinched the neck of Petrus's neck. I embezzled 20 million, and I have to fill the hole. That's enough, Claire interrupted. She turned to Graham. You're the one who really pushed this. The doctor's white coat was wrinkled. I just wanted to control his temper. He staggered 2 steps and held on to the back of the chair. He said he wanted to make public the misdiagnosis of his ex-wife in 1998. I checked the safe dosage of pethidine, 5 milligrams a day, but the regulators have turned his metabolic system into a sieve. Claire slammed the medical records on the table. 6 kinds of toxins are stuck in it. The heart can't bear it. Graham suddenly fell to his knees. I didn't expect this. I really didn't expect it. The grape leaves rustled outside the window. Claire closed her case notebook, and her pen paused on the words "case closing report." The rosy sunset shone through the window lattice, stretching the shadow of the long table very long. The outlines of the 6 suspects overlapped like an unsolvable fog. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Lucas said suddenly, the lawyer will come to read the new will. Claire looked up. His fingers were still on the cap of the Petrus bottle, and the wine in the bottle was swaying in tiny gleams of light. Dad has contacted a lawyer. Lucas's voice was so light that it sounded like a sigh. I heard that most of the inheritance will be given to the illegitimate daughter. The night wind blew in through the window, bringing with it the scent of roses. Claire looked at the last rays of sunlight in the sky and snapped the pen cap on. Some truths can be determined by law. How do you measure some people's hearts? The restaurant clock struck 9. The butler's footsteps could be heard in the distance. It was time to prepare for tomorrow's will reading. At 10 o'clock, the clock in the hall of Rose Manor struck the 10th time. Attorney Ethan Black pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses, and the manila file bag made a crisp sound on the mahogany table. Lucas stood at the end of the long table, his knuckles whitening against the edge. The tablet screen that Emily was holding flickered on and off, reflecting the red corners of her eyes. Vivian's wedding ring turned 3 circles on her fingertips and suddenly clicked into the base of her finger. Margaret's silver jewelry box was open with half a tube of polishing cream lying inside. The corner of Ruth's apron was twisted into a braid, and half a box of pethidine appeared in Graham's white coat pocket. The last will and testament signed by Mr. Edward Ross on June 15, 2023. Ethan turned to the first page. After deducting the statutory inheritance share, the remaining 80% of the estate will be inherited by Anna Ross. Who? Emily slammed her tablet on the table. Illegitimate daughter. Ethan's voice was like a scalpel cutting through gauze. Born in 1987 with the late painter Eileen Carter. The DNA report is attached. The long table exploded. Emily slammed the table and stood up. Not fair. We are the real family. Vivian suddenly pulled off her wedding ring and threw it into the fireplace with a clang. Margaret closed the jewelry box. The sound of the lock was louder than Emily's scream. The corner of Ruth's apron was finally torn, revealing the loan shark's IOU sewn inside. Graham's Adam's apple moved, but he didn't make a sound. Lucas held Emily's trembling shoulders and said, "Everyone sit down first." He looked at Ethan. Is there any room for negotiation? The will is valid after notarization. Ethan pushed up his glasses. Unless the heir voluntarily gives it up. Margaret sneered. It's too late to say anything now. She picked up her handbag and walked out, her high heels making a clacking sound on the marble. Vivian followed her, pausing as she passed the fireplace. The wedding ring gave a last glimmer in the coals. Ruth suddenly squatted down and picked up the pieces of apron on the ground. Xiao Kai's legs, she whispered. Xiao Kai's legs. Claire grabbed Ethan as the crowd dispersed. Anna Ross is there, in the back garden. Ethan pointed to the French window. She insisted on not entering the main house. Anna sat on the wrought iron bench, her back looking like a piece of paper crumpled by the wind. When Claire approached, she stood up suddenly, the DNA report in her hand curled up at the corner. I really didn't know he was my father. She dug her nails into her palm. Someone mailed this 3 days ago, and it has the address of Rose Manor. Why did you come? I want to know. Anna's voice was as light as a sigh. Why did he come to me now? She lowered her head to read the report, and the strands of hair on top of her head swayed in the wind. I don't want the inheritance. Real. Claire fished out a test card, not for drugs, but to wipe the armrest of the bench. Half a dried datura petal is embedded in the wood grain. She suddenly understood why Edward chose this method. When the 6 children each held a sharp knife, perhaps only the 7th stranger could make them see clearly that the so-called family was never a shackle of blood. At the closing meeting 3 days later, Ethan pushed a stack of legal opinions over. No one caused the death subjectively, and the toxin dose did not reach the standard of intentional homicide. He turned to the last page and said, "It is recommended that no prosecution be made." Claire's pen paused on the words mass psychological poisoning. The grapevine outside the window climbed over the cordon, its leaves dazzling green. It was the same vine that had rustled on the night of the crime. On the day she left the manor, Lucas walked her to the door. He held a bottle of 1945 Petrus in his hand, the wax seal still intact. "Tell me, if no one did anything that day," he stared at the rose on the wine label, "would it be different?" Claire said nothing. She remembered the sentence in the autopsy report. 6 toxins formed a chain reaction in the metabolic system. It was like 6 pairs of hands pushing at the same time, and everyone thought it was just a light touch. "I will," she said finally. The manor gate slowly closed behind him. When Claire turned around, she saw Anna standing in the rose garden, standing on tiptoe to pick a white rose. The thorns caught on her cuffs, but she seemed unaware, and just looked up at the window of the main house, which used to be Edward's study. The wind lifted the hem of Claire's trench coat. She touched the case notebook in her pocket, which contained a copy of Anna's DNA report. Some answers may need to be asked from another family member. The rain had just stopped when Claire parked her car at the entrance of Gallery Alley in downtown Vancouver. There was a note on the glass door saying "closed today." When she pushed the door open, Anna was standing on tiptoe to adjust the copper device on the display stand. Hearing the noise, Anna's hand stopped in midair. The device was a broken chain. Each link was engraved with a different surname. Detective Hawk. Anna jumped down, her sneakers glistening with floor wax. "I figured you'd come." Claire didn't beat around the bush. "That day at the manor, you said you didn't want the inheritance." "I really don't want it." Anna pulled out a stack of curatorial proposals from under the display case. "Identity reconstruction, connections beyond blood ties," was printed on the cover. "I have been planning these exhibitions for 3 years." She turned to a page and saw a photo of a temporary family made up of homeless people. "Can blood tie define family?" She suddenly looked up, her eyes unusually bright. "But he is my father." Claire took out the evidence bag which contained the datura petals on the bench that day. "Did you know that the manor grows datura?" "I don't know." Anna dug her nails into the corner of the plan. "But I know there is a pot of white roses on the windowsill of his study." She lowered her voice. The envelope where the DNA report was sent 3 days ago had a rose stamp. The gallery doorbell suddenly rang. Anna went to open the door, and when she came back there was a manila envelope in her hand. She was halfway through unpacking the photo when her face suddenly turned pale. The photo was of a little girl with pigtails, with a faded playground in the background, an anonymous threatening letter. Anna pushed the envelope to Claire. The postmark was local. It said, "I don't deserve the last name, Ross." Claire pinched the corner of the photo. "This is you when you were 5 years old." Anna nodded. "My mother never mentioned the playground." She suddenly grabbed Claire's wrist. "Detective, I really just want to know. Her Adam's apple moved. Does he love me? As Claire put the evidence bag into the inner pocket of her windbreaker, her cell phone vibrated. It was a text from Lucas. Ethan is waiting for you at the law firm.
Ethan's office smells like cold brew coffee.
Lucas leaned against the French window, his tie loosened by 2 notches, holding a copy of the will modification record in his hand. Edward said, "They think I'm punishing someone, but I just want them to learn to let go." Ethan pushed his gold-rimmed glasses. Exactly what he said. Lucas slammed the copy on the table. Learn to let go. He took away control of my foundation. Stopped Emily's art grant. Vivian's medical research grant. He suddenly got stuck. But at the dinner that day he drank the red wine I handed him, and drank it very slowly. Ethan flipped open the file folder. 3 months before he revised his will, he consulted me about the estate tax exemption clause. He pulled out a note with scribbled handwriting. And this toxicity superposition experiment needs to be confirmed. Lucas's finger paused on the 4 words toxic superposition, and his Adam's apple roll. When Emily dropped her mother's rolled canvas on the floor, the wooden frame cracked. She squatted down to pick it up, and a yellowed piece of letter paper slipped out of the scroll. The signature is Lydia Chen, Anna's mother, her father's first love, and a painter who was rumored to have gone to Paris for art. Dear Ellie, the blue ink on the letter faded to light gray. I voluntarily gave up my custody rights, not because I don't love Edward. He has just taken over the family business, and Rose Manor cannot have the scandal of an illegitimate daughter. Emily's fingertips trembled. The last sentence was repeated. If he finds Anna one day, please tell her that I have never regretted letting her be as free as the wind. The ultraviolet light in the lab made Claire squint. She stared at the toxin metabolism simulation diagram on the computer screen. The curves of 6 toxins were entangled in the liver metabolism area. Graham's anesthetic is the key. The technician tapped the label of vitamin B12. Edward changed 5 brands in the 3 months before his death. The last one contained trace amounts of benzodiazepine. Claire pulled up Edward's drug purchase record, and the last note was, "The patient said he always felt the medicine tasted wrong." As she closed the file, the sycamore leaves outside the glass window were falling. It was dark by the time Anna locked the threatening letter and photos in the gallery safe. The neon lights outside the floor-to-ceiling windows cast mottled shadows on her face. She turned around to draw the curtains when the doorbell rang again. "Who?" she called out, but no one answered. I opened the door and saw a yellowed photo lying on the ground. In the photo, the 5-year-old girl was riding on the man's neck. The man was wearing a white shirt. Most of his profile was cut off by the camera, but the rose tattoo on his wrist could be seen, exactly the same as the one on the oil painting in Edward's study. As Claire left the gallery, the rain began to fall again. She walked towards the alley with an umbrella in her hand, and caught a glimpse of a hunched figure at the corner of the street. It's Ruth, the old chef, with her apron draped over her arm, was walking towards the Rose Manor. The rain wet the white hair at her temples. Claire was about to shout when her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a new email from the laboratory. The production batch number of the vitamins Edward had last replaced did not match the purchasing records of the Graham Clinic. As she lowered her head to read the email, Ruth's figure had already melted into the rain. When Claire followed Ruth's footsteps into the manor, the old cook was squatting in front of the old flower bed in the backyard. Her apron was stained with mud, and her fingers were rummaging through the withered roots of the roses, as if she was looking for something that had been buried for years. "Miss Youth." Claire spread the test report on her lap. The paper was wrinkled by the rain. "Aconitine is not from spices." She pointed to the red mark on the report. "It's pain-relieving oil." "You mistook the osmotic oil for the spice bottle, didn't you?" Ruth's hands suddenly began to shake. She stared at the words. "Aconitin content exceeds the standard on the report." Tears falling into the mud. "I didn't mean it. Little Charlie lost the bet last month." and those people threatened me with his photo. She grabbed a handful of dirt, blood oozing from the cracks between her fingernails. I just wanted to give Mr. a stomachache for a few days. He had this problem before when he ate something wrong. Claire squatted down and saw half of the IOU sticking out of her apron pocket. You thought you were just trying to make him feel bad, she said softly. Ruth suddenly grabbed her wrist. Really? I even washed the oil bottle 3 times, just to avoid getting a little extra. Margaret's jewelry studio smells like turpentine. When Claire pushed the door open, she saw her smashing the mirror with a silver hammer. Broken glass splashed at Claire's feet, and the old woman's reflection was shattered in the shards. Enough. Claire held down her hand that was holding the hammer. Margaret dug her fingernails into the back of her hand. Thallium is not for polishing. She suddenly laughed. Tears mixed with powder and flowed down. I have been taking it for 10 years, and the doctor said that a small dose can cure anxiety.
I just want to make Edward dizzy for a few days so that he won't have the energy to manage my jewelry business.
She dug out a medicine bottle from the drawer. The label said anti-anxiety tablets, and the ingredient column was marked with trace thallium in red pen. I've checked the information. Half a tablet a day won't cause any problems. Margaret suddenly collapsed. How could he give his inheritance to that illegitimate daughter? The blood of the Ross family can only flow in the manor. Graham's house arrest cell has blackout curtains drawn. When Claire gets a call from him in the middle of the night, his voice is like rusty gears. Come and see my masterpiece. He sat on the edge of the bed, the bedside lamp illuminating the dark circles under his eyes. In his hand was a brown medicine bottle with a handwritten label of Regulator X. The original dose was too low. He unscrewed the bottle cap and poured out 2 white pills. I tripled it. Edward always said the medicine didn't taste right, so he figured it out, didn't he? Claire took the vial, and at the bottom was undissolved powder. You know this will stack with other toxins. Graham suddenly laughed. Of course I know. When his ex-wife died, I misdiagnosed an acute myocardial infarction as ordinary angina pectoris. He put his knuckles against his temple. He threatened me with medical records for 20 years, saying that he would ruin my reputation. He raised the medicine bottle to the light. Now it's good, I don't have to wait for him to do it. When Vivian turned herself into the police station, she was holding a tin box in her arms. She pushed the box to Claire, and the metal made a light sound when it hit the table. This is almond powder for desserts. I mixed it with antidepressants. She lowered her head and twisted her fingers. I just wanted him to have trembling hands at the banquet and knock over the desserts, so that everyone would see that he is not so impressive. She took out her cell phone and played a recording. The background sound was the sound of porcelain clinking, and Edward's voice was filled with impatience. Vivian, I don't eat sweets, but Dad. I said I don't want to eat it. The recording stops abruptly. Vivian sniffed. I wanted to remind him not to eat too much, but he didn't listen at all. The blue light from the monitoring room screen reflected Claire's face. She replayed the party video 20 times, finally stopping on the shot of Emily Payne. Edward fished out the medicine box from the inside pocket of his suit, tilted his head back, and swallowed 2 pills. This is the only time that day that Graham wasn't asked to pass on the medicine. The technician came over to take a look. Usually the doctor would watch him take the medicine. Claire's fingertips hovered over the pause button. Edward's expression was calm, even a little relieved, as he swallowed the pills. She thought of the toxicity superposition curve in the lab report. If he knew the existence of all the toxins in advance. The police station archives room was exceptionally quiet. Late at night, Claire stood at the door, the final report in her hand weighing heavily. Moonlight shone through the window at the end of the corridor, making the words "Case Closed Report" appear pale. Sometimes, the most dangerous person is not someone else, but himself. Vivian's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Claire looked at Edward's comment in the report on modifying his will. Toxicity superposition experiment needs to be confirmed, and her Adam's apple moved. She reached out to push the door. and the metal handle was freezing cold. Behind the door is a whole wall of file boxes, each of which contains someone else's secrets. And this time, hidden deep in the secret, may be more than just murder. When the case report was delivered to the director's office, Claire rapped her knuckles on the door handle 3 times. No prosecution. The old director pushed his reading glasses, and the pages of paper made a crisp sound under the lamp. 6 kinds of toxins, 6 poisoning lines. How do you want me to explain to the prosecutors? None of them wanted to kill anyone. Claire's voice was very light. Vivian only mixed half a gram of antidepressants. She thought it would make Edward's hands tremble and make him look embarrassed. Emily diluted the heavy metal solution 20 times. She calculated the capacity of the soup bowl. Lucas mixed the datura extract in the red wine. He checked his father's alcohol tolerance. She paused, including grams and aesthetics. He added it for 3 years, and each time it was only enough to make Edward sleepy. The old director turned to the last page of the report, and the comment, "Toxicity superposition test needs to be confirmed," was circled in red. On the day Edward changed his will, he asked his lawyer to check the toxin exposure records of all family members. Claire took out her phone and checked the laboratory email. He saved the toxicity superposition curve on his personal computer, and it is exactly the same as our test results. The office fell silent. Raindrops outside the window hit the glass, and Claire could hear the sound of her own heartbeat. He knew that everyone's dose was not lethal, she said softly, but he also knew that long-term use of Graham's regulator would change the metabolic rate. He took 2 pills in advance that day, deliberately triggering the cumulative effect. The old director closed the report and tapped the table with his knuckles. There will be a hearing tomorrow. The crystal chandelier at Rose Manor was covered in dust in the afternoon sun. Lucas stood at the head of the long table with the new will spread out in front of him. 80% will be donated to the Children's Art Fund, and the rest will be inherited according to law. His voice was 2 degrees lower than usual. I will withdraw from the fund management and fly to Paris next week. Margaret's silver spoon clanged onto the bone china plate. Are you crazy? It's Dad's money. Lucas interrupted her, his eyes sweeping over everyone at the table. Emily clutched the curatorial manual. Vivian held her wedding ring, and even Graham's empty seat was cold. Finally, he stopped at Anna's face. The girl was wearing a plain white shirt, and she looked exactly like the little girl hiding behind the rose bush in the photo from 20 years ago. He wants us to learn to share, doesn't he? Anna's eyelashes trembled. She was the last one to leave when the meeting ended. She pressed her fingertips lightly on the armrest of Lucas's chair, and a card slid into the drawer. On the opening night of the Father and I solo exhibition, Claire squeezed into the crowd. In the central display case was the yellowed childhood photo, and next to it was an abstract painting. Layers of red paint with a few strands of black seeping through the deepest part. That's a cumulative toxin, the narrator's voice sounded. Miss Anna said that her father taught her, with his life, that hate and love are never either one or the other. As Claire wrote her name in the autograph book, she glanced at the last page. Forgiveness. The handwriting was crooked, as if it was written with the left hand. Graham's letter arrived before he was committed to the mental hospital. The manila envelope was very thin, and inside was a note. If I can save someone, why can't I save myself? Claire tucked the letter into her case notes and turned to the last page. On the copy of the medical record from 20 years ago, Edward's ex-wife's death diagnosis was circled in red pen. Acute myocardial infarction. She remembered Graham's smile when he said, "It's okay now," and it was like a needle pricking her nerves. The morning light always comes early for the serious crime squad. Claire pushed open the office door. The green ivy on the windowsill was hanging with new leaves, and on the desk lay a dried rose bookmark with golden edges on the petals. On the back was written in pen, "Thank you for not making us criminals." She walked to the window holding the bookmark, and the sunlight shone through the glass and fell on the back of her hand. On the street downstairs, A black car was driving slowly, with its windows half lowered. The wind blew up the beige curtains, revealing half of a blurry face, high nose bridge, slightly protruding brow bones, very much like the profile of a drug lord in the file. Claire's fingers suddenly tightened, and the rose petals made a crackling sound in her palms. She turned back to the table and turned on the computer. The unread email notification is flashing. The sender is an unknown account, and the subject has only one word: next. As the mouse hovered over the open button, Claire heard footsteps coming down the hallway. Someone knocked on the door and poked his head in. Detective Hawke, the technical department, said they found new clues in Edward's old phone. The moment she pressed the enter button, she heard the sound of a car starting downstairs. At 6 in the morning, Claire's heels made a crisp sound on the tiles when she pushed open the office door. The new leaves of the green radish hang down to the table, with water droplets on the tips. Her eyes swept across the tidy desk, and finally stopped at the paperweight, a light grey business card with rough edges, as if it had been cut temporarily. There is no writing on the front of the business card. The pencil writing on the back was deeply embossed, and the 6 words "watch out for your back" soaked through the paper texture. She picked up the business card and rubbed her fingertips across the paper fibers. The fingerprint powder box is on the second layer of the drawer. I swiped it 3 times and no trace was detected. The monitoring room is on the 3rd floor. Technician Xiao Wu rubbed his eyes and played last night's video. At 2:17 in the morning, a black car drove into the alley behind the police station, and the license plate was covered with mud. A man in a dark grey windbreaker came down from the driver's seat, his hat brim pressed down to his brow. He looked up at the window of her office. I stayed for 2 hours and 9 minutes. Yao Wu pointed at the progress bar. I left at 5 and 3 minutes. When I left, I turned the garbage can in the back alley upside down. Claire dug her nails into her palms. The turmoil at Rose Manor was far from over. Lucas slammed his father's old pen down on the desk. Scattered in the mahogany drawer were half a box of cigars, a few yellowed stock certificates, and a silver USB flash drive. He remembered that this was the limited edition Tiffany that he had given to Edward on his birthday last year. The moment the USB drive is plugged into the computer, an encryption interface pops up on the screen. The password box flashed, and he somehow entered Anna 1998, the birthday of his illegitimate daughter. Interface jump. There were more than 20 emails in the folder. The sender was Black Onyx at swissbank.com, and the titles were all garbled. The last email was sent 3 days before the incident. Mr. Ross, the last transfer of the Obsidian Fund has been completed. Are you sure you want to cut off all ties? He grabbed his phone and called Ethan. The phone rang 7 times before it was connected. The lawyer's voice was trembling. Lucas, your father, there are some things that even I don't know. What's the meaning? When he asked me to change his will last week, he said, what needs to be settled must be settled. Ethan paused for 2 seconds. Listen to me, don't check anymore. As the phone was hung up, Lucas stared at the Obsidian Fund on the screen, his Adam's apple moving.
Anna's coffee cup made a soft tap on the table.
The call was made at 7 o'clock this morning, and the woman's voice was hoarse. I'm your mother's agent, and I have something to give you. The cafe she mentioned was her mother's favorite place when she was alive. There was ivy on the windowsill, and the glass door made a creaking sound. When the glass door opened, she smelled a strong scent of bitter almonds. The man in the corner booth was lying on the table, holding a half cup of cold cappuccino in his right hand. Sir? She touched the other's shoulder. The man's head was tilted to one side, his pupils were dilated, and there was brown foam at the corners of his mouth. The waiter rushed over screaming. Anna stepped back to the door and caught a glimpse of a manila envelope on the table. She pulled away quickly, knocking over the sugar bowl as she turned around. There was an old photo in the envelope, a young woman holding a baby standing in front of a rose bush, with the words, "To my little rose, mommy loves you forever," written on the back. There was also a Swiss bank account statement with a long string of zeros in the balance column. The sound of sirens came from far away. Anna stuffed the envelope into her coat pocket and slipped out the door among the crowd of onlookers. The back of Claire's neck suddenly tightened. She stood in the corridor of the police station, holding in her hand a copy of the dashcam that had just been delivered by the technical department. Footage of all the vehicles entering and leaving the Rose Manor banquet that night. In paragraph 17, an old truck flashed by. This license plate. She leaned closer to the screen. Is it registered to Henry Clark? Yes. Edward's former gardener. Drowned 3 months ago. The technician flipped through the documents. The case report said he fell into the Fraser River after drinking. Claire's finger paused on the pause button. Half a hemp rope was vaguely visible in the back of the truck, and the pattern of the rope was the same as the strapping tape that was lost in the manor warehouse. Check the car's deregistration record. She stuffed the copy into her briefcase. Also, Henry's autopsy report. I want the original. When I left the police station, the wind blew fallen leaves onto my face. She instinctively felt that someone was staring at her, so she turned around and saw a figure in a windbreaker walking into the convenience store. Do you really think it was just an accident? A low, hoarse male voice exploded in my ears. Claire turned around and saw the empty street reflected in the convenience store window. At that position just now, there was only half a faded corner of a windbreaker, blown by the wind and stuck to the trash can. She took out her cell phone and quickly dialed the number of the serious crime team. Check all the surveillance cameras around Rose Manor in the past 3 months, and focus on finding men wearing dark windbreakers and hats. As dusk fell into Rose Hall, Claire crouched under the grapevine trellis at the back door. The wreckage of an old truck was parked in the corner. The red paint on the body had faded to powder, and the trunk lock had signs of being pried open. She put on rubber gloves and lifted up the rotting car mat, revealing several pieces of broken glass, the same material as the wine glass Edward drank from. You think you have found the truth, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Lynn's voice suddenly rang in my ears. Claire looked up suddenly and saw great leaves swaying in the wind. Shadows like countless hands were crawling towards the back of her neck. The phone vibrated in my pocket. New text message, 1:11 p.m. Old Pier Underground Bar. Bring your test card. The sender's number was unfamiliar, but the last digit was the one used when tracking her this morning. The evening breeze lifted the hem of her police uniform. Claire stared at the hemp rope looming in the back of the truck, and her fingertips slowly curled into her palms. When the moon climbed up the manor's clock tower, she took out the toxin test card she carried with her, and gently pressed it against the wreckage of the truck. The edges of the test card begin to turn purple. Preview of the next chapter. The neon light of the underground bar at the old dock is reflected on Claire's face. She pushes open the half-open door. The man in the windbreaker has his back to her, holding a glass of iced whiskey in his hand. Detective Hawke. When he turned around, half of his face was revealed from under the brim of his hat. It was the figure wandering in the alley behind the police station in the surveillance video. The neon lights of the underground bar at the old pier turned into a purple haze in the rain and fog. Claire looked at her watch, 22:53, and pushed open the rusty iron door. The basement was stuffy, and the heavy metal music made my ears numb. The man in the windbreaker sat at the innermost table, his hat pulled down low, the ice cubes in his glass clinking against the whiskey. Detective Hawke. He looked up, half of his face hidden in the shadows. It was the figure in the surveillance camera in the back alley of the police station. Claire pulled up a chair, and the sound of its metal legs scraping across the floor drowned out the music. Henry's van. You moved it. The man pushed a brown paper bag. Trust document from Swiss Bank in 1993. The beneficiary is Annalie's mother. Claire flipped open the page, and Edward's signature on the yellowed page hurt her eyes. Erin Chen. It happened 30 years ago. The man picked up his glass. He caused Irene to have a miscarriage and took away her unfinished painting. Now he is looking for his illegitimate daughter, not to divide the inheritance, but to atone for his sins.
An old photo fell out from the bottom of the paper bag. Young Edward hugged a woman in a painted dress, with the background being the datura fields of the Rose Manor.
The rain is getting heavier. Claire's heels tapped on the bluestone slabs and her phone vibrated. A text message from Vivian. East Wing Tea Room. Come quickly. The crystal lamps in the tea room make people dizzy. Vivian clutched the mug, her knuckles turning white. I changed Andrew's medication, she said suddenly. I've had enough of him and the gallery assistant. Claire's test card slid out half an inch. Neurotoxin. The main ingredient was replaced with one from the lab. Vivian looked down at the bottom of the cup. But when we redid the experiment last week, the reaction curve after mixing the 6 toxins was exactly the same as that in Edward's body. She looked up suddenly. This can't be an accident. Claire felt a chill on the back of her neck. Do you suspect someone has calculated the dosage? Vivian didn't answer, but pushed the lab report over to her. The ink spread across the page like a black mist. Margaret's studio smelled of turpentine. As soon as Claire entered the door, the old woman took out a cassette tape from the oak cabinet. I found it this morning when I was sorting out old things. She pressed the play button. After the electric sound, it was the voice of a young man. Irene, I will make it up to you. When the children are older, That's enough. Margaret paused. He forced Irene to flee to Switzerland. Now his illegitimate daughter is back to ask for the inheritance, and he's afraid his secret will be exposed. Claire clutched the tape. Why did you give it to me? My granddaughter is studying jewelry in Switzerland. Margaret looked at the mandala outside the window. I don't want her to follow the old path. Late at night in the art warehouse, Emily is labeling canvases. As Claire handed over the coffee, she suddenly said, I saw a diary in Dad's study. What year? Last winter. Emily's fingertips traced an abstract painting. He wrote, The person I feel most sorry for in my life is not them, but myself. She turned her head. I used to think he favored his brother, but now I understand that he has a mountain in his heart. Claire thought of the old photo of the bar. That mountain. Is that Irene? Emily said nothing, and pressed the copy of the diary into her hands. The last page had a mandala painted on it, with Obsidian Fund written in the center of the flower. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the desk lamp in the Manor's archive room cast a circle of light on the account book. Claire turned to the 2003 record, and the pen's words were so powerful that they could be seen through the paper. The proposal to modify the will was rejected by the family meeting, and Lucas was the most vehement opponent. She pulled out her phone to take a picture, and the camera swept over Obsidian Fund. Exactly the same words as in the diary. It turned out that Edward wanted to leave the money to his illegitimate daughter 20 years ago, but was stopped. Click. Claire looked up and saw that the door of the archive room was cracked open by the wind. The moonlight filtered in, illuminating Vivian standing in the corridor, her face paler than the wall. Someone entered the lab. Her voice trembled. The dessert recipe notebook is missing. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She thought of Vivian's lab report, the hemp rope in the truck, and the mandala in the old photo. The phone vibrated in his trouser pocket. It was a text message from Lucas. I have found the bank where the Obsidian Fund has an account. See you at the dock warehouse at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Claire looked at Vivian's shaking shoulders and put her phone back in her pocket. Some truths should come to light. At 3 o'clock in the morning at Vancouver's South Pier, the salty sea breeze blew into Claire's collar. The warehouse door was pushed open with a creaky sound. Fund information? Claire went straight to the point. Amid the sound of paper rubbing against each other, the top page was Edward's diagnosis, early-stage Alzheimer's disease, diagnosed in December. Claire turned to the second page, which was a research project book, Screening and Intervention of Biomarkers in the Prodromal Stage of Alzheimer's Disease. In the signature column of the project leader, the words Edward Ross were clearly visible through the paper. He knew he would forget. Lucas's voice was hoarse. That's why he was in a hurry to change his will. Lynn pulled out a photo from her inside pocket. It was a photo of Edward sitting in a wheelchair, holding the hand of an old professor in a white coat. He visited the lab last winter to see the progress of the last experiment. Claire thought of the diary Emily gave her, and the mandala flower on the last page. That was Edward's secret death signal to himself. On the day of the dinner, he poisoned everyone. Lucas suddenly laughed. His eyes reddened. He calculated our greed and that the combination of drugs would be lethal. But he didn't calculate. His Adam's apple rolled. He didn't calculate that we actually loved him. When he reached the door, he paused. I booked a flight for this morning. Not checking anymore, Claire asked. Everything that needs to be checked is here. He turned around, his glasses reflecting a cold light. Some people use death to exchange for peace. You must learn to face it while you are alive. At 10 o'clock in the morning, under the dome of the Contemporary Arts Center, Anna's exhibition was closing. Claire squeezed into the crowd and saw that all the members of the Ross family were there. Lucas stood in the first row. Vivian held her daughter's hand, and Emily held her father's diary. I declare that I give up my inheritance rights. Anna's voice came through the microphone, and there were gasps from the audience. She raised the microphone. But I have a suggestion. Use part of the inheritance to build a family psychological rehabilitation center. She looked at Lucas. My father said that the Ross family's illness can never be cured by money. Margaret wiped her tears and nodded, and Emily pressed the diary against her chest. Lucas raised his hand to wipe his face, his knuckles turning white. In the evening, in the study of Rose Manor, Lucas was holding a yellowed letter. Claire stood at the door, watching him unfold the letter with trembling fingers. It was Edward's handwriting. The strokes were still hard. I always said you were not like me, now I understand. What's the good of being like me? You asked how to be a good son, I answered. Just be a good person. He said everything he needed to say a long time ago. Lucas looked up, tears still on his face, but I had to wait until he died to hear it. Late at night in the police station's archives room, Claire signed the case closing report and paused her pen over the words, non-murderous mass poisoning incident. She turned to the last page and wrote, the most poisonous thing is never the mandrake or thallium, but the fear we are unwilling to speak out. As I closed the folder, I heard the sound of an engine outside the window. She looked up and saw the black car on the street, exactly the same as the one that appeared outside the manor on the day of the crime. The car windows were covered with dark film, so you couldn't see inside, but the engine was running softly, as if it was waiting for something. Claire took out her cell phone and hovered her finger over the search bar that read, Retrieve Driving Records. The wind lifted the curtains, making the case report rustle. A corner of the last page of comments was blown up, revealing the diagnosis underneath. Edward's time of death fell exactly on the peak of the drug superposition he had calculated. The car's taillights suddenly lit up, leaving 2 red streaks in the night. Claire looked in the direction it disappeared and stuffed the phone into her coat pocket. Some answers may not be revealed until the next morning. The blue light from the police station's surveillance room shone on Claire's face. She stared at the computer screen, her fingers tapping on the keyboard. Pull up the driving record of the black car last night. Xiao Wang from the technical department leaned over and said, Detective Hawk, this license plate was just cancelled 3 days ago. Check the original registration information. Claire dug her nails into her palm. The shadow of the black car outside the manor on the night of the incident had circled in her mind 7 times. The GPS track that popped up on the screen at this moment was like a poisonous snake. From 10 o'clock on the night before the incident to 2 o'clock in the morning, the car circled outside the Rose Manor 3 times, and at its closest point, it was only 50 meters away from the back door. Owner's information, she said in a tight voice. Xiao Wang gasped. The owner of the car is Carl Fraser, a Swiss banking consultant. The death certificate shows that he died 3 years ago. He clicked on the attachment, but the Geneva City Hall records show that the certificate is forged. Claire grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. As the raindrops hit her face, she remembered Edward's diagnosis. The time of death was exactly at the peak of the drug superposition. Someone had calculated the time carefully. The study at Rose Manor is filled with the smell of old books. Lucas pressed his knuckles against the spine of Das Kapital, and suddenly the 7th book from the left in the 3rd row gave way. He pulled out a hardcover book, and a yellowed piece of paper slipped out from the inner layer. Obsidian Fund Trust Agreement. He read it aloud, his pupils constricted. The beneficiary column was a string of gibberish, and the termination clause was circled in red. The anonymous beneficiary has absolute decision-making power. The phone vibrated in his hand. It was Ethan's number. "Ethan, I need. Don't check it anymore." The lawyer's voice was as cold as ice. "There are some things you shouldn't know." "Why?" "Because everyone who knew is dead." The busy tone of the phone being hung up pierced Lucas's eardrums. The lock on Margaret's studio door was broken. When Claire arrived, she was squatting among the broken glass, holding half of the unfinished necklace in her hand. They took the blueprints. She suddenly laughed, the smell of alcohol mixed with tears. "I brought hangover soup to my father late last Wednesday night. He was on the phone, saying the time has come." She grabbed Claire's sleeve. He spoke in French, and he rarely spoke French. "Who is the other party?" "I don't know." Margaret dug her nails into Claire's wrist. "But he said it's time for the true heir to step forward." It was raining and snowing in Zurich. Claire was standing in a cafe in the old town when the woman opposite her handed her a USB drive. This is what Lynn left before she left. Emilia's blue eyes were as cold as ice. Fraser called 3 days ago. There was a crackling sound of electricity in the recording. The plan was successful, and the target has been cleared. Fraser's voice was accented with German. "The division of the inheritance you requested can be initiated next week."
Well done. The other party's voice was changed, and sounded like it was coming from a layer of frosted glass. "Remember, never let the Ross family find you."
Goosebumps formed on the back of Claire's neck. She remembered the words in the case report, non-murderous mass poisoning. It turned out that everyone was just a pawn. The Vancouver night fog filled the archives room of the manor. When Claire turned to the 20th old photo album, a yellowed group photo fell out. The small words on the back made her breath hitch. "The true heir is not on the list." In the photo, Edward is in his 20s, standing next to a young woman in a floral dress, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby's face was smeared with ink. The wind from the terrace ripped up the ends of Claire's hair. She looked at the twinkling lights in the city, and the phone in her pocket vibrated. It was a message from Anna. "I was sorting through my mother's old things, and found a locked wooden box." Claire stared at the message, her throat tightening. The baby with scribbled marks in the photo, the anonymous beneficiary of the fund, the real heir, mentioned in the voice-changing phone call. All the clues exploded in her mind. She took out the case report, and the comments on the last page rustled in the night wind. The name that never appeared in the will suddenly appeared clearly in her mind. There were footsteps downstairs. Claire quickly put the photo away, and when she turned around she ran into Lucas's arms. He held the newly found document in his hand. His eyes were colder than she had ever seen before. "I found out that the anonymous beneficiary of the Obsidian Fund was born on March 12th. Claire's heart skipped a beat. March 12th, 1995. The birth date of the painted baby in the photo. "Who is it?" she asked. Lucas said nothing and pointed downstairs. The light was still on in Anna's room. In the shadow of the window she was standing on tiptoe to reach the old wooden box on the top shelf of the closet. Anna dug her nails into the brass lock of the wooden box. Her hands were shaking as her mother's camphor wood scent mixed with the musty smell came out. At the very bottom was a leather-bound diary, with tea stains on the edges of the pages. The first line of handwriting was from the mother. On March 12th, 1995. Lynn said she couldn't hold on any longer. She turned to the page with the dried rose. Little Anna is not my child. Lynn begged me on the delivery bed, saying Edward would ruin the baby. When she swung the swaddling clothes into my arms, blood soaked through the hem of my skirt. The diary clattered to the wooden floor. Anna squatted down to pick it up, and a photo slid out from the inside page. A young woman in a floral dress was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The baby's face was blurred, exactly the same as the archival photo Claire showed her. The fume hood in the laboratory hummed. Vivian's white coat was stained with reagents, and the culture dishes in the incubator were glowing with a faint blue light. She stared at the curve on the computer screen, and the pen left a red mark on her palm. When the metabolic peak graphs of the 6 toxins overlapped, the originally scattered danger zones suddenly became connected. Someone had calculated the time difference for each toxin to enter the body. "It can't be an accident," she said to the air. The phone lit up with a message from Lucas. Mom's lawyer said that the Obsidian Fund beneficiary logged into the account today. Ruth's apron was tangled. She stood at the door of Claire's office, cinnamon powder still between her fingernails. The person who threatened me that day, her throat tightened, was my cousin Mary, but she drowned in the lake behind the manor 3 years ago. Claire checked out the surveillance footage from the night of the incident. A blurry silhouette flashed past the kitchen, wrapped in the navy blue coat that Mary often wore, and the curled hair was exactly the same as when Mary was alive. "She came to see me a week before she died," Ruth suddenly said. She said someone gave her money to keep an eye on the master's diet. As the spotlights of the gallery came on, Emily's high heels stepped on the red carpet. Under the display board of House in the Mirror, family members in 20 oil paintings all have the same face, a broken, overlapping, tearful face. "We always look for other people's reflections in the mirror." She smiled into the microphone, the teardrop mole at the end of her eye trembling slightly. "It was not until today that I realized that what we should see most clearly is the self hidden in the mirror." Anna stood in front of the last painting. The girl in the painting had eyes exactly like hers, and the words "Find Lynn" were written in gold paint around the edge of the frame. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Claire. "The DNA report is out. Your genetic match with Edward." The fluorescent lights in the laboratory were so bright that it was hard to open your eyes. Claire held the test report until her knuckles turned white. "The MTHFR gene mutation that is unique to Edward's family is clearly visible in Anna's gene map. If Lynn is Edward's sister," she looked up the old files and found that the name Lynn Ross was circled 3 times in red pen on the death record in The gallery was empty late at night. Anna's shadow was cast on the self-portrait, and the eyes of the person in the painting glowed in the darkness. She reached out to touch the canvas, and suddenly there was a rustling sound of footsteps behind her. "You're finally here." The sound was like it was soaked in water, with the noise of an old tape. When Anna turned around, she knocked over the display stand. The picture frame fell to the ground, revealing a yellowed note on the back. "Obsidian Fund, 7 Black Forest Road, Zurich, Switzerland." My phone vibrated in my bag. Claire's number popped up. "Lucas has a flight booked for tomorrow morning." Anna picked up the note, and the moonlight shone on it through the French window. The handwriting was from the same pen as the one in the diary that said, "The true heir is not on the list." She looked out the window at the night, and heard her own heartbeat drowning out the alarm in the gallery. Some secrets were finally going to be revealed. As Anna stuffed the note into her coat pocket, her fingertips rubbed against the raised gold paint. The night breeze from Zurich blew into her collar. She quickened her pace towards the hotel, her phone vibrating in her palm until it became hot. It was the location from Claire. 7 Black Forest Road. "Victor is waiting." Lucas's flight arrived 2 hours earlier than scheduled. He stood in the hotel lobby, his suit wrinkled and draped over his arm. When he saw Anna, he immediately came over and said, "Claire said Victor has something to show us." His Adam's apple moved. It's about my father. Number 7, Black Forest Road is hidden behind 2 rows of firs. When the metal door slid open silently, Claire was already waiting at the end of the corridor, with half a test report in her white coat pocket. It was Anna's DNA result. He knew it a long time ago. She only said this, and pushed open the door of the innermost conference room. Victor Harris sat at the end of the long table. The projector in front of him was on, and the blue light cast a diamond-shaped spot on his glasses. Mr. Edward contacted me 3 years ago. He pushed a silver USB drive over. This is the video he specified to be played after his death. Edward in the video looked thinner than in the photo. He sat in the wine cellar of the Rose Manor, with a 1945 Petrus wine box behind him. "I have Alzheimer's disease," he said directly, his voice distorted by electronic sounds. "The doctor said I have 2 years at most. I don't want to become an old man who can't even remember his own name." Anna clutched the armrest of the chair. Lucas suddenly grabbed her wrist, his palms sweating. "I arranged that family dinner." Edward tapped the table with his fingers. "I checked everyone's secrets, Lucas's fund deficit, Emily's art fund loophole, Vivian's cheating record. They all need money and need me to die." He smiled, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes piled up into deep grooves. "So I added mandrake to the wine, heavy metals to the soup, and let Graham continue to mix anesthetics into the vitamin. I know these toxins alone can't kill me, but a body that takes them for a long time," he paused for a long time, "will become the best container. I don't want to punish you." At the end of the video, Edward raised a glass of red wine. "I want you to learn to forgive. Forgive each other's greed. Forgive my selfishness. The real legacy is never money. It is..." His eyes suddenly blurred, and his fingers unconsciously stroked the wine label. "It is learning to turn the mirror around and look at yourself." When the projection went out, Anna's face was still immersed in the blue light. Victor pushed a brown paper bag over. "This is a paternity test from 1992. The paper was as brittle as a dead leaf. Mr. Edward was involved in a corporate espionage case at the time, and making your existence public would implicate the entire family. He gave you to Lynn Rose, his biological sister, the Aunt Lynn in your diary. But Aunt Lynn died in 1978. Anna's voice trembled. "That was a fake death." Victor flipped open another document. "She used her twin sister's death certificate and took you to the suburbs of Vancouver. It was only last year, on her deathbed, that she contacted Edward and said, 'The true heir is not on the list.'" Ethan Black's tie sat askew at his collarbone when the conference room door burst open. He rushed in, holding a stack of documents. "Emergency freeze order." His eyes swept over Anna. "The actual controller of the Obsidian Fund is not Edward, but Carl Mitchell, the son of the old gardener." Carl Lucas stood up. "His mother fainted at the manor 10 years ago, and my father asked Graham." "That's right." Ethan slammed the document on the table. "Graham misdiagnosed it as hypoglycemia, but it was actually an acute myocardial infarction. Carl found the case, and has been collecting evidence against you over the years. The person threatening Ruth was his substitute, and he was also the one who gave Mary money. He didn't want money. He wanted to see the Ross family kill each other." Anna suddenly remembered what Ruth had said about the navy blue jacket. The old gardener always wore navy blue work clothes. When Carl was a child, he often squatted at the kitchen door to watch Ruth cook. "The fund is temporarily frozen." Victor pushed his glasses. "But Mr. Edward has a backup plan. If all the heirs reach a settlement, the funds will be automatically transferred to the newly established Ross Family Mental Health Center." Lucas suddenly held Anna's hand. His palms were no longer sweaty, but hot. "I want to donate the dividends from overseas investments as well." He looked at Claire. "After Mom passed away, we all got sick. Emily's art exhibition, Vivian's antidepressants, and me." His Adam's apple moved. "We need a place to learn how to live." Anna looked at the red corners of his eyes. The fir trees outside the window cast spiderweb-like shadows in the moonlight, and she thought of the painting house in the mirror in the exhibition. The overlapping faces in the painting suddenly became clear, and each one was real, cracked, but still complete. "I accept," she said softly, "but my condition for becoming a trustee is..." She looked at Lucas. "We talk on the phone once a week. It's like a real family." Claire received the letter at the Vancouver airport. Victor's handwriting looked like printed text, with a dried rose petal tucked inside the letter, and Edward's handwriting smudged on the back. Sometimes, the deepest secrets are not meant to be hidden, but to wait for the right person to reveal them. As she stood at the window of her apartment, dusk was falling over the ruins of Rose Hall. The workers had just demolished the collapsed wine cellar during the day. A few bottles of 1945 Petrus could still be seen among the ruins, glowing amber in the sunset. A car horn sounded downstairs. Claire lowered her head to adjust her white coat, and when she looked up again, there was a figure in front of the manor gate. He stood with his back to the light, his features gilded, his age difficult to tell, but it reminded her of the action of Edward stroking the wine label in the video, like he was touching a forgotten summer. The wind lifted her bangs. Claire took out the toxin test card from her pocket. The metal edge touched her skin, and it was as cool as an unspoken secret. The figure raised his hand, as if to touch the Ross family crest on the door. As dusk deepened, his face remained in shadow. As soon as Claire's fingertips touched the window frame, the phone vibrated numbly in her palm. "It's a message from Lucas. The pixels of the photo are blurry, but it is clear enough to see. The figure in front of the manor gate, with his back to the light, is looking at the camera with his side profile. High cheekbones and a shallow scar on the left eyebrow, which overlapped with the ID photo of Evan Gray when he was 20 years old in the file. I just checked the police archives." Lucas's voice was filled with electric noise. His mother died of a medical malpractice in 1998, and Graham was in charge at the time, but I found this at the bottom of my father's drawer. The photo switches to a piece of letter paper. On the yellowed letter paper, Edward's handwriting was crooked, as if he was writing with a trembling hand. To Ms. Mary Gray. Regarding the accident on March 15, 1997, I am willing to pay a compensation of 2 million Canadian dollars in my personal name. The account is attached. The date was May 1998, 3 months before Mary's death. Mary did not die of a medical accident. Lucas's voice suddenly tightened. Father's diary mentioned that she was pregnant at the time. Claire felt a chill on the back of her neck. She took out the test card and pressed it against her temple. The coolness of the metal pressed against her throbbing blood vessels. This was her habit when she was nervous. The phone vibrated again. It was Ethan calling. "Don't be fooled by appearances." The lawyer's voice was like an ice cone. I checked Victor's schedule. He met with Evan for 3 hours in Geneva last Wednesday.
What Evan wants is not compensation, but control of the Obsidian Fund.
Air. Claire repeated his words. The offshore fund Edward set up in Switzerland 30 years ago. The beneficiary column, Ethan paused, is written as unnamed Ross Air. Claire clutched the test card, turned around and grabbed her white coat. She thought of what Victor said yesterday. Something more important than inheritance, and the bottles of amber glowing Petrus in the ruins of the wine cellar. Edward's movement of stroking the wine label was like touching a forgotten summer. Victor's office had blackout curtains drawn. The blue light of the computer screen reflected his tense jaw, and the video skipped frames. A man in a maintenance worker's uniform pried the lock of the wine cellar, and his gloved hands brushed over the wine rack numbers. A figure in a baseball cap squatted in the gardener's hut and took out half of an old diary. There was also a close-up in which the man's fingertips stopped somewhere on the wall of the wine cellar, where there was a very shallow scratch, like the letter B. He's looking for coordinates. Victor turned off the video. I had someone check all the architectural drawings of the manor. Only the old deed from 1923 was not destroyed. The dust in the archives made Claire cough. She squatted in front of the moldy wooden cabinet, flipping through the yellowed brown paper bags one by one, until the file bag at the bottom with Ross Manor expansion printed on it. A thin deed as thin as a cicada's wing floated out, marked in pencil in the lower right corner, the handwriting blurred by time. B-17. Claire's breath hitched. She remembered the words illegitimate daughter in early years, in Edward's will, and the painting House in the Mirror in Emily's exhibition. The overlapping faces suddenly had a new arrangement. She stood in the backyard of the manor as dusk streamed in through the windows. The shadows of the grapevines formed a web on the ground, and the wind carried the sweet smell of rotten grapes. "You are finally here." The whispers were like bubbles rising from the ground. Claire's test card made a soft ding sound. It was not a toxin reaction, but some kind of metal resonance. She walked in the direction of the sound, and the tendrils of the vines brushed against the back of her hand, as if someone was gently tugging at her sleeve. Deep in the trellis, a blue stone slab is slightly raised. The moonlight leaked through, just illuminating half of a silver badge in the gap between the stone slabs. It was exactly the same as the Ross family crest, except that there was a tiny mandala flower in the middle. "I've been waiting for you for a long time." The sound was getting closer. Claire bent down to pick up the badge, and just as her fingertips were about to touch it, a slight click sound came from under the stone slab. She looked up suddenly and saw a pair of eyes looking at her in the shadow of the vines. Claire's fingertips hovered over the silver medallion. The click sound coming from under the stone slab was like a needle, breaking the silence in the twilight. She touched the small knife on her waist. It was brought back from Interpol. The blade was tempered with fluorescent powder, and now glowed with a faint blue light in the shadows. When the blue stone slab was lifted, a cloud of dust rose up. There was no soil underneath, but a stone brick engraved with a rose pattern. There was a very shallow crack on the edge of the stone brick. She used the tip of the knife to pry it open, and the entire stone wall suddenly made a dull sound. The grapevines rustled and swayed, and half of the wall caved in, revealing a secret door half a person's height. A rusty lock hung on the doorknob like a dried snake. Claire knocked on the lock with the back of a knife, and a grain of verdigris fell out of the lock. She held her breath and pried the lock spring. With a snap, the lock spring popped open. Along with the creaking of the door hinges, a musty smell mixed with the aroma of old wood wafted into the air. The chamber was smaller than she had imagined. There is an oil painting hanging on the wall, and the peeling paint shows the former appearance of the manor. The red brick exterior wall is not yet covered with ivy, and a man in a coarse cloth shirt is standing under the porch. Claire took a closer look and couldn't help holding her breath. The man's brow bone and jawline looked like they were carved with the same chisel as Evan's. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Ruth, waiting for you in the kitchen. Something important. The kitchen overhead light was broken, so Ruth left the oven light on. Her apron was stained with gravy, and her fingers kept twisting the apron string. My cousin worked as a maid in the manor 20 years ago. Before she died, she held my hand and said that there was a blood door in the deepest part of the cellar, which could only be opened by the blood of the Ross family. Her Adam's apple moved. I didn't dare to say it before, because I was afraid that it was related to the death of the old master. Claire pulled out the test card. "Did your cousin mention anyone who might have this blood?" She said one winter, the old housekeeper walked into the cellar, holding a swaddling cloth, and inside the swaddling cloth was a silver medallion with a mandala pattern. Ruth suddenly grabbed her wrist, "Just like the one you found today. The manor at night is like an ancient clock." Claire walked towards the guest room, holding the oil painting. When she turned into the corridor, she heard sobbing. Margaret leaned against the windowsill. The moonlight dyed her silver hair into white frost. "I saw him 30 years ago." Her voice trembled. "Edward was arguing with a young man in the wine cellar," the man shouted. I am a child of the Ross family, and said he wanted to take back what belonged to him. She grabbed Claire's hand and pressed it against her chest. I thought he was crazy at the time, but his eyes are exactly the same as Evan's today. The early morning rain came suddenly. As Claire was hiding from the rain on the porch, a black sedan slid up to her. Lennon leaned out of the driver's seat, his beard unshaven. I didn't leave. Someone offered me 3 times the price to keep an eye on the manor. He threw a brown paper bag over. Just brought it back from the lab. Evan's DNA matches the genetic markers of the main line of the Ross family at a 19. After the rain stopped, Claire returned to the secret room again. This time she brought a high-powered flashlight. When the beam of light swept across the wooden box in the corner, a leather-bound diary appeared under the moldy cloth. The title page reads, Isabel Ross. Edward said the child must not be exposed to the light, but his eyes are too much like old Mr. Ross's. The mechanism of the secret door in the cellar is at B17. It can only be activated by the body heat of a blood relative. My little Ivan will come back. He will open the door and take back everything that belongs to him. The handwriting on the last page was very sloppy, and the ink dripped into a blurred blob. They found the diary, and Edward said he would send me to Switzerland. No, he won't let my child live. Claire closed the diary and goosebumps appeared on the back of her neck. She thought of the superimposed curves of the 6 toxins in the autopsy report, like a carefully calculated death equation. The obsidian fund that Evan wants may not be money at all. The air in the secret room suddenly began to flow. As she turned around, the flashlight fell to the ground, and the light wavered towards the door. Evan stood there, rain dripping from his hair onto the bluestone slabs, his trouser legs stained with mud. He held half a silver medal in his hand, which matched the half she had picked up under the trellis. "You're faster than I thought." His voice was very soft, as if he was afraid of waking something up. But some things can't be stopped by simply finding out. Claire felt for the knife at her lower back. The detection card suddenly vibrated in his pocket. This time it was not a metal resonance, but something more dangerous that was drilling into the secret room through the vent. Evan's eyes swept across the diary in her hand and fell on the painting on the wall. He smiled, and that smile reminded Claire of the scene in the wine cellar surveillance. The man in the baseball cap squatted in the gardener's hut, and had the same smile on his face when he took out half of an old diary. "Do you want to hear the truth?" He took a step forward, his shadow covering Claire's feet. "You thought it was an accidental poisoning, but it was actually an invitation letter I sent to everyone." There were footsteps outside the secret room. Claire's heartbeat drowned out the footsteps. She stared at the undercurrent in Evan's eyes, and suddenly realized, from the moment she picked up the silver medal, she was already standing in front of the gate of blood. And on the other side of the door there are far more secrets than just Edward. Claire's fingers clasped the handle of the knife, and the vibrations from the detection card penetrated into her palm through the fabric. Evan's shadow fell over the tips of her shoes like a water-soaked black cloth. "You mean the invitation?" she said in a steady voice, her eyes fixed on the half-silver seal in his hand. "Did you ask them to poison him?" Evan didn't answer, but reached for the painting of rose and snake on the wall. The carvings on the edge of the frame were pushed open by his fingertips, revealing a coin-sized groove. He pressed the silver seal in, and the stone wall made a dull turning sound. The blood door opened. "Isabel is my grandmother." He turned sideways, and the cold light coming through the door outlined his pale face. On the day Edward sent her to the Swiss mental asylum, my mother knelt in the rain, holding me, who was 3 months old. They said that the blood of the Ross family must not be tainted. Claire's breath hitched. The scribbled little Ivan in the diary suddenly took shape. It turned out that Evan was not the gardener's son, but Edward's half-brother. Lucas embezzled public funds. Emily was afraid that her art fund would be withdrawn, and Vivian wanted to get rid of her husband. Evan's voice was like a taut string. I remembered each of their greed for Edward. I added datura to the wine, dissolved heavy metals in the soup, and mixed neurotoxins with antidepressants. The dosage was just enough for them to think they could control it. He smiled, until Graham's anesthetic was added. The cumulative effect was like a domino effect.
You killed him?
No, I saved him. Evan's pupils shrank into pinpoints. Edward should have died 10 years ago from Graham's misdiagnosis. I used a trace amount of poison to keep him alive, waiting for him to change his will, waiting for him to acknowledge me. Claire's phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the caller ID. Lucas. Detective Hawke? Lucas's voice was trembling with tension. Anna just contacted me and said that Evan has a copy of the will behind the bloodgate. Claire looked up. Evan was staring at the secret compartment inside the door, where a wooden box with a brass lock lay. What he wants is not money, she said into the phone, but status. The crystal chandelier in the old study cast a spot of light above Anna's head. When she pushed open the door, Evan was staring at the family photo on the windowsill. It was Edward's 40th birthday photo. Lucas was riding on his father's neck, and Emily was holding the hem of her skirt and laughing. "I've seen your birth certificate." Anna's voice was like ice. The mother is Isabel Ross, and the father's column is blank. Evan's fingers scratched white marks on the window frame. "So I need Edward's signature. Do you think that with a will you can become a member of the Ross family?" Anna walked up to him. "I grew up in an orphanage. When Edward found me, he said, 'You have Ross's blood.' But what has blood given me? Lucas is on guard against me. Emily treats me as an intruder, and even the gardener rolls his eyes at me." Evan looked away. "At least you have a name. I've been at the manor for 20 years, and they called me Little Gardener and Handyman." "What are you doing now?" Anna grabbed his wrist, using poison to force them to confess. "How is it different from Edward, who sent your grandmother to a mental hospital?" There were hurried footsteps in the corridor. When Lucas rushed in, Victor Harris was standing in the doorway, holding a gold-stamped document in his hand. The letter of authorization from a Swiss bank. Victor pushed up his glasses. "Mr. Edward Ross established the Obsidian Fund 3 years ago. The beneficiaries include his illegitimate daughter, Anna Ross, his eldest son Lucas Ross, and," he looked at Evan Gray, "the direct descendant of Miss Isabel Ross." Lucas's Adam's apple moved. "Father knows. He had someone track Miss Isabel's descendants for 20 years. Victor flipped open the document. "The terms of the fund are clearly written. The 3 beneficiaries must jointly manage the fund for a term of 5 years. If malicious competition occurs during this period," he paused, "the fund will be donated to the Vancouver Institute of Toxicology." Evan's fingertips touched the edge of the document. Anna released his wrists, and Lucas tugged at his tie. The 3 figures blurred on the floor. When Claire walked out of the manor, the setting sun was dyeing the rose bushes blood red. She took out her notebook to write something down, and a piece of paper slipped off from the inside page. "Thank you for not making criminals out of us. This time I really mean it." The handwriting was masculine, with some sloppy cursive. Claire looked up at the window on the 2nd floor. A corner of the curtain of the old study was lifted by the wind, and 3 figures were swaying in the light and shadow. The scent of roses under the porch suddenly became stronger. She stuffed the note into her coat pocket and turned toward the police car. In the rear-view mirror, the golden rose on the Ross family crest glowed warmly in the twilight, like a not-so-strong fire. No one noticed that a piece of paper was blown up by the wind in the vent of the attic on the top floor. It was half a page of a torn diagnosis. The words "Dr. Graham misdiagnosed heart failure" swirled in the air and fell back onto the dusty windowsill. Claire's heels crunched over the gravel. She held the note until her knuckles turned white. The word "sincerely" on the note was like a thin needle pricking the back of her neck. She had clearly not said a soft word to any man during the 3 days of investigating the case. When Victor Harris said "Ancient Covenant" yesterday afternoon, a light flashed under his glasses. He says it involves the servant family, but is interrupted by Lucas coughing. Claire touched her work ID in her coat pocket and turned to walk toward the side door of the manor. The archives are in the basement. The administrator, old Tom, had gone to the hospital to accompany his wife, and the key was hanging in the third drawer of his desk. She had caught a glimpse of it when she delivered the documents in the morning. The wooden filing cabinet creaked. Claire flipped to the bottom of the third row, and her fingertips touched a stack of stiff paper. On the yellowed craft paper, the ink from 1897 has turned brown. The Russ family signed a covenant with the Gray, Carter, and McCoy clans. If there is no legitimate heir, the descendants of the three clans will elect a new head of the family. She gasped. Evan's last name, Gray, was on the list. The phone vibrates. It was a message from Ethan Black. Emergency meeting rescheduled to 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ethan's office is in the east wing of the manor. When Claire passed by, she saw him holding an opened letter, with veins bulging on the back of his fingers. An anonymous report. He looked up, and the pen cap made a crisp sound on the table. It said that there is a loophole in the management of the Obsidian Fund. Claire didn't respond. She noticed a half-broken lock cylinder at Ethan's feet. The safe had been pried open.
About the copy of the contract.
Ethan suddenly clenched the letter paper. It's gone. The sweet smell of baking muffins wafted from the kitchen. Ruth was standing on tiptoe, scrubbing the top of the cupboard, when a crumpled note fell out of her apron pocket. Yesterday, the worker said that the old gardener muttered, "There's something under the grape trellis," before he died. She hurriedly bent down to pick up the paper, with flour stuck in her fingernails. I don't mean anything else. I just feel... Claire crouched down. She remembered that the old gardener's grape trellis was in the corner of the north yard, with vines climbing all over the rusty iron frame. The tin was buried deeper than expected. She dug 2 nails, and finally touched the cold metal. When the lid of the box was opened, a musty smell mixed with the scent of ink gushed out. On the yellowed account book, Edward Ross's crooked signature read, Gray Family Education Fund. This is... Ruth came over to take a look, and suddenly covered her mouth. Oh my God, he even let Edward pay for Evan's high school tuition. Behind me came the sound of leather shoes stepping on gravel. Claire turned around and saw Lynn Carter leaning against the grape trellis, holding a photograph in her hand. A secret meeting in the back hills. He threw the photo over. Last Wednesday at 2 a.m. In the photo, Evan's face was half turned sideways, and a man in a baseball cap stood opposite him. Although it was blurry, that hooked nose. Claire's temple was throbbing. Former family doctor, she blurted out. The death certificate from 3 years ago stated that the doctor died of lung cancer. Lennon didn't nod, but turned and walked away. The wind lifted the hem of his coat, revealing the gun holster on his back. Night falls on the manor. Claire climbed up the bell tower, and the evening breeze blew the scent of roses into her collar. She took out the photo, and the moonlight just illuminated the man's wrist. There was a crescent-shaped scar, exactly the same as the description in the medical accident file 20 years ago. You thought the truth was revealed. A whisper came out of the wind. Claire turned around suddenly, and saw only the dark shadow cast by the swinging pendulum. She took out her cell phone and retrieved the backup file from the Swiss bank. The part where the date on the ledger overlapped with the fund transfer record cast a tiny bit of light on the screen. The bronze bell in the bell tower began to strike the time. Claire looked at the twinkling lights in the distance, and stuffed the photos and account books into her canvas bag. Some names should be crossed off the deceased list. Claire's leather heels tapped on the stairs, and every step felt like hitting a nerve. She threw the canvas bag onto the table, and the account books and photos scattered across half of the wooden table. The cell phone screen lit up in the dark, and the Swiss bank's file backup was still at the transfer record page. On March 15, 1983, the Ross family remitted 50,000 Canadian dollars from their overseas account, and the recipient was T. Green. She held the account book and turned the pages, and the yellowed pages made a crisp sound. The first disbursement from the Gray Family Education Fund in 1998 coincided with the remittance timeline. His fingers danced on the keyboard, and Thomas Green popped up in the search box of the police database. In the medical accident report 20 years ago, this name was sandwiched between the mentor column of Graham Wilson, followed by a line of small words. Died of lung cancer on December. The phone suddenly vibrates. Detective Hawk. Victor's voice was low, with the ticking of a clock in the background. I just received an encrypted email. The sender used a dark web channel. Claire grabbed the phone. What's the content? Stop investigating Ross Manor, or you'll be the next to die. Pause for 2 seconds. Attached is a surveillance video of you at 2 a.m. last Wednesday in the morning, on the Great Barber in the North Yard. A chill ran down the back of her neck. The UBS representative's voice became even lower. Dr. Green is not an ordinary retired doctor. I checked his old information. He participated in illegal genetic experiments in Geneva in the 1990s and had financial dealings with the Black Rose organization. That organization specializes in reselling human organ. Thank you. Claire hung up the phone, forwarded the email to the police station's technical team, and tapped out a rapid drumbeat on the table with her fingertips. From upstairs came the sound of broken porcelain. She pushed open the door to the stairwell, and the smell of alcohol mixed with the scent of roses poured out. Margaret was leaning on the windowsill in the corridor, with an empty whiskey bottle at her feet, and half a cup of amber liquid in her left hand. I was 12 years old at the time. She suddenly spoke, her tongue a little too big. There was a man hiding behind the wine barrel in the cellar, with blood on his white coat. He was holding a notebook in his hand, with Ross Project written on the cover. Claire took a half step forward. Did you see his face clearly? Hooked nose. Margaret burped, tears mixed with wine flowing down. I shouted, "Doctor," and he turned and ran. Later, my father said I was wrong. It was the new winemaker. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Emily knocked on Claire's door. Her fingertips were trembling as she clutched a leather diary with dried rose petals pressed against the cover. Before my mom died, she always said they would come. Today I was sorting through her jewelry box and found this. The diary turned to the page of July 12, 1995, and the ink was spread all over. Father's breathing was getting weaker and weaker. He grabbed my hand and said, "He didn't grow old naturally. He was taken away." A photo slid out from the interlayer. 3 men in white coats stood in front of the laboratory. The one in the middle was Dr. Green, who died 20 years ago. Written in pen on the back was the phrase, "When the blood relatives return, the judgment begins." Claire stuffed the photo into the evidence bag. "Thank you. Don't thank me." Emily took 2 steps back and bumped into the door frame. My mother said before she died that the Ross family's blood was poisonous. The storage room on the top floor of the bell tower was covered with thick dust. Claire turned on the flashlight, and the beam swept across the rusty candlesticks and cracked photo frames, finally stopping in the corner. An old typewriter covered with oilcloth, with a stack of yellowed manuscript paper piled next to it. The ink on the title page has faded to a light brown. The Ross Contract, Bloodline and Betrayal. In 1867, the first-generation head of the family, Henry Ross, signed a contract with the Green family to use funds to support genetic experiments in exchange for a pure heir. In 1923, Subject A7 died of a neurotoxin attack. Recorder Green Oldion noted in the report, mixed toxins can induce organ failure, and the dosage must be controlled. In 1980, Graham Wilson joined the project, and his mentor Thomas Green led the research on chronic toxicity superposition. A single toxin is not lethal, but a mixture of 6 can simulate natural death. The pages rustled in Claire's hands. The last page only had half a line of words typed. When the 6th toxin, the wind blew in through the broken window, causing the pages of the manuscript to flip. Claire closed the manuscript and looked up. The moonlight was shining through the window lattice onto the oak tree opposite. In the shadow of the trees, an outline gradually became clear, and the hooked nose cast a cold, and hard shadow under the silvery moonlight. It was the dead man in the photo. He stood there, his eyes piercing through the glass. Claire grabbed her canvas bag and rushed out the door. In the echo of the stairwell, she could hear her own rapid breathing and the faint laughter coming from downstairs. Claire's running shoes crunched over the gravel. The moonlight cut the path behind the manor into pieces. She stared at the back of the hooked-nosed man in front of her. He was not walking fast, as if he was deliberately leading her here. Most of the stained glass in the abandoned church was broken, and the wind blew in, tearing Dr. Green's voice into pieces. Claire pressed herself against the broken wall and saw Evan with his back to her, his shoulders tense as if they were taut strings.
You think you're avenging your father? Green's voice was like a snake's tongue. In 1980, when your mother was sent to the laboratory, the Ross family pressed their fingerprints. They needed impure blood as experimental subjects, and your father was the only one who escaped.
Evan turned around abruptly. So you let me steal the will. Let me get close to Anna. That's to get you back to where you belong. Green took out a yellowed parchment from his coat. The Ross contract clearly states, when the pure bloodline is cut off, the descendants will inherit everything. Now Edward is dead. Lucas embezzled public funds, and Emily's art fund is already an empty shell. You are the new head of the family designated by the contract. Claire dug her nails into her palms. She finally understood that Evan was not an avenger, but the key that Green had been raising for 20 years. I don't want this kind of inheritance. Evan grabbed the candlestick on the table and smashed it against the wall. What I want is their apology, not to become another Ross. Green bent down to pick up the fragments, his tone still steady. It's not up to you. When the media exposes you as an orphan of the experimental subject, and when Anna's exhibition nails the Ross family to the pillar of shame, you will be their only savior. Claire fished out her cell phone, her fingertips hovering over the record button. There was a scream of crows outside the church, and Evan suddenly looked up, his eyes sweeping over where she was hiding. She held her breath until he lowered his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Give me one night." At 2 o'clock in the morning, Claire's phone vibrated. The screen lit up with a text message from an unknown number. "I'm by the rose garden fountain. Don't bring a gun." Evan squatted by the fountain, clutching half a piece of broken glass in his hand. He said my mom's last name was Green, not Rose. His Adam's apple moved. I thought I was seeking justice, but I ended up being his knife. You can be the master of the knife. Claire squatted down. Tell me everything you know, and I will help you. Evan dug his fingers into his palms. He has a notebook that he always keeps in his pocket. It contains the names of all the test subjects. At the same time, in the dining room of the main house of Rose Manor, Lucas slammed the Rose contract on the long table. The flickering candlelight revealed Vivian's coral-painted hands crumpling the tablecloth, and Margaret's pearl necklace tangled in a knot. The fund is suspended, and the assets are handed over to the court. Lucas's voice was like an ice cone. We can't let Green continue to manipulate with this piece of paper.
Are you crazy?
Vivian stood up suddenly. What about my son's tuition? If the art fund stops, what will happen to my artists? Emily held her sister's hand. Brother is right. We have to protect ourselves first. Margaret broke the necklace, and the pearls rolled all over the floor. I have been waiting for this brand to become independent for 10 years. Lucas slammed his fist on the edge of the table. Didn't you read the last page of the contract? Green didn't want money. He wanted the 6th toxin. We fed Edward 6 of them with our own hands. The restaurant suddenly became quiet. Ruth's hand holding the hot cocoa shook, and the porcelain cup fell at Margaret's feet and shattered into starbursts. As the morning light climbed up Anna's gallery, the under-the-contract display board was crowded with reporters. She stood in front of the display case, which contained a copy of the contract, experimental records with bloody fingerprints, and her mother's death certificate. "These papers can kill people," Anna said quietly, but her voice cut through the flashbulbs. "But what's more terrifying is that we thought they could save lives. A reporter raised his hand. You know you are Edward's illegitimate daughter, but you still insist on exhibiting it. Because of the illegitimate daughter, the orphan of the experimental subject, the threatened chef. Anna pointed at Evan in the crowd. We are all trapped by this piece of paper. When Claire arrived at the bell tower, Green was standing on the edge of the top floor. The wind lifted his coat like a black bird. Do you think the contract will be dead if you catch me? His laughter was mixed with the sound of the wind. If Henry Ross can sign it, I can find another one. But you won't be able to wait until that day. Claire raised the recorder. Evan's testimony. The video of the family meeting. Anna's exhibition. You lost. Green's pupils shrank into pinpoints. He suddenly pounced on Claire, but stopped the moment he touched her shoulder. Sirens were heard downstairs. You won for now. He leaned over to Claire's ear as he was handcuffed. But the secret of the sixth toxin has just begun. In the morning light, the spire of Rose Manor was gilded. Claire stood under the clock tower, the original contract in her hand, rustling in the wind. She noticed that as Green was being led away, a leather notebook slipped out of his coat and fell at her feet. The gold-stamped letters on the cover have faded, but the word Green is still clear. She bent down to pick it up and opened to the first page. In the wet ink, the 5 words sixth toxin was staring at her. Claire crouched on the steps of the bell tower, the wind blowing the pages of her notebook. In the lower right corner of the 3rd page, cellar B3 was circled in red pen, and next to it was a crooked maze-like route map, with the end point marked. She rubbed her fingertips over the ink, which was a fresh blue-black color, written just before Green was taken away. The phone vibrated in my palm. Victor's number popped up. I found the initial construction drawings of Rose Manor in the archives of the Zurich Bank. He lowered his voice. The construction drawings from 1890 show that there is a storage room in Area B, under the main house, but it is not marked on the modern architectural drawings. Coordinates. Claire took out a pen and wrote on the edge of the map. B3. Victor paused for 2 seconds. That wall was sealed with cement 50 years ago. Claire, if you want to go, I'll be there now. She hung up the phone, her knuckles white. In the gallery, Anna's picture frames covered half of the wall. She took out the last painting, Bloody Rose. There was a very shallow scratch on the back of the canvas, as if it was carved with the tip of a knife. The phone lit up, and a message from the cryptography professor popped up. 031795, corresponding to the B3 cellar lock cylinder number. She grabbed her car keys and texted Claire. I know how to open the cellar. Evan leaned against the door frame of the study. Moonlight filtered in through the blinds, casting a thin gap on the spine of a history of Canadian wine. He held his breath and pulled out the book, and the letters in the interlayer rustled. The words Dear Evan made his pupils contract, and the signature was Green. Your mother is subject number 47. Your blood will continue the Ross family's purification plan. He clenched the letter tightly, and cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. His adoptive parents said he was adopted from an orphanage, but in Green's letter, even the crescent birthmark on his left wrist was clearly written. The entrance to the Rose Manor cellar is at the deepest part of the cellar. Claire shone a strong flashlight on the wall, and saw new scratches on the cement seal, indicating that Green had been there. Anna took out her cell phone and took the password, 031795. The metal lock cylinder turned 6 times and there was a slight click sound. A musty smell came out from behind the door. Claire turned on the tactical flashlight, and the beam swept across the spider webs on the wall and stopped on the metal box in the corner. The lock was rusty, so she pried it with the tip of her pen. With a squeak, yellowed pages of paper floated out. March 1945. Experimental subject number 12. Datra extract, PAW. Heavy metal solution. Claire read aloud, and her fingertips paused. Edward Ross. Signature of the sponsor. Anna leaned over to take a look. At the bottom layer lay a glass reagent bottle. The label had faded to gray. but the molecular formulas of the 6 toxins were clearly discernible, and the mixed toxins reported in the autopsy report. Her voice trembled. It's the same kind. Claire put the bottle into the evidence bag. Edward is not a victim. He is the culprit. There was a sudden echo from the cellar. The footsteps were very slow, like the heels of leather shoes knocking on stone steps. Claire held the gun on her waist and turned her head to sweep the flashlight across the entrance. A man in a dark gray uniform stood in the shadows, his white hair combed neatly and an old scar on the left side of his face. That was George Fisher, the former estate steward, whom I had met at the funeral 3 years ago, but everyone remembered that he died of a sudden heart attack after Edward's ex-wife's funeral. George raised his hand, the glare of the revolver blinding him. "Detective Hawke," he said, his voice like sandpaper. "You shouldn't be here." Claire's fingers tightened on the gun handle, but her pupils shrank slightly at George's words. 3 years ago, when she attended the funeral of Edward's ex-wife, she had indeed seen this old butler, who always served tea with his eyes downcast. The obituary read, "Sudden myocardial infarction," and even the tombstone was erected on the back slope of the manor. "Mr. Fisher," she let go of her pistol and raised her hands. "You said shouldn't have come. The cellar or these lab records." George shook the muzzle of his gun, and the old scar glowed pale in the flashlight. "I've waited for 20 years. He poked Anna's lower back with the barrel of the gun. "Let's go to the innermost part." The musty smell got stronger. Claire noticed fresh shoe prints at the base of the wall that matched the pattern of George's leather soles. The slate wall narrowed at the end. George pressed a raised brick with his palm. With a click, half of the wall slid back. There is a faded family portrait embedded in the wall. Edward, when he was young, stood in the middle wearing a white shirt and holding a baby in his arms. There was a crescent birthmark on his left wrist. Evan. George's voice suddenly became hoarse. Ross's eldest son, born in 1987. He pointed to the boy huddled at the edge of the photo. The one next to him is an experimental subject grown with Evan's blood. The boy's face was painted with red paint, but Claire recognized the outline. It was 70% similar to Lucas. Anna's phone vibrated in her pocket. She looked down and saw a message from Lucas. "I'm outside the wine cellar. Don't act rashly." As Lucas's Maserati rolled over the gravel road, its windshield wipers frantically sweeping away the sudden downpour, Ethan's phone was connected on the 7th ring, and the law firm's printer was humming in the background. "Just received an anonymous courier. A recording file. Listen to it." After the noise of the electric current, Edward's voice sounded, with a dying breath. "The experiment has failed long ago. The mixture of those toxins will destroy the host's organs. But I can't stop. Ross needs a more perfect air." Lucas slammed on the brakes and the front of the car hit the cast iron rose on the manor's iron gate. The wipers left 2 water streaks on the windshield. He remembered that when his father handed him the red wine this morning, his knuckles trembled and spilled the wine. It turned out that it was not aging, but toxins that were eroding him. The thermos on the passenger seat rolled to my feet, and it contained the hot soup that Ruth had forced into my mouth. When he bent down to pick it up, the metal lid knocked against the footpad, revealing a note inside. "There is a secret in the cellar. Find Irene." The handwriting was Ruth's, but there was a crooked scratch on it, as if it had been crumpled and then flattened. Ruth's fingers trembled 3 times on the lock of the iron box. She had found it behind a flour sack when she was tidying up the old kitchen cupboards, and there was half a dried rose stuck in the rust, just like the one Irene had pinned in her hair. The pages of the nursing journal were as brittle as thin ice. She turned to May 17, 1992, and the blurred ink made her squint. Little Evan cried after his blood was drawn. The sample boxes marked Swiss Laboratory Ross Project. The phone rang. The screen read Erin Watson, and the note was Sacred Heart Nursing Home. "Ruth." The other party's voice was filled with electric noise. "I know why you called. In the pause, there was a crisp sound of medicine cups colliding. Back then, I secretly copied the experimental records and was discovered by the old housekeeper. They said I had a mental breakdown, but I'm not crazy. Ruth clenched the diary tightly, her knuckles turning white. Where's the photo? You said there was in the mattress. Irene suddenly lowered her voice. The boy who was used to replace Evan should be in the manor now. Ruth's hands were shaking when the photo came. In the pixelated black and white photo, the little boy in overalls stood in front of a rose bush. There was no crescent birthmark on his left wrist. He looked exactly like the boy in the photo of Lucas's 12th birthday. Claire's tactical flashlight swept across the secret compartment in the wall. The dates of the experimental records ranged from 1945 to 2001. The signature on the last page was Green M, the same signature as the letter Evan found in the study. My phone vibrated. It was a photo sent by Ruth. She zoomed in for 3 seconds, and her pupils contracted when she looked up. Evan is the real eldest son. Lucas is the product of an experiment. George finished for her. Edward used Evan's blood to breed him, hoping to create an heir who would not be defeated by toxins. But he didn't expect that even the experimental subject could not withstand the mixed toxins. So you saw 6 kinds of toxins superimposed in the autopsy report. Anna suddenly grabbed Claire's wrist. Evan's letter mentioned the blood continuation purification plan. So purification means eliminating unqualified test subjects. There were hurried footsteps outside the cellar. Lucas's voice penetrated the iron door. Claire took out the reagent bottle from the evidence bag, and the bottle reflected her tense jawline. She dialed Lucas's number, listened to his rapid breathing, and whispered, "Come to the garden, I need to tell you the truth about your origins." The rain has stopped. Lucas stood in the middle of the rose bush, water dripping from the petals onto the back of his hand. The sound of crows came from the bell tower. He touched the family emblem on his chest. The silver rose was so cold at his fingertips. The moment the metal buckle loosened, he remembered the strange look in Evan's eyes when he stared at his left wrist at his father's funeral. He remembered his mother holding his hand and calling Owen before she died with a tremor in her voice that she had never had before. The badge fell on the blue stone slab, making a very light ding sound. The crystal chandelier in the Manor restaurant cast a spot of light on the second floor window glass. Ruth stood at the stairs holding the nursing log. Irene's voice was still looping on the phone. They replaced the child, but blood can't deceive people. Claire's footsteps came from the corridor. She was holding a reagent bottle containing 6 toxins, which was flashing coldly in the shadows. "Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, she said into the phone. "Call everyone to the restaurant." The night breeze blew up a rose petal, which floated into the half-open window of the restaurant and gently fell on the back of the chair at the head of the long table. The clock in the restaurant showed 10 o'clock. Claire pressed the play button on her phone, and Irene's voice came out of the loudspeaker with a rustling sound. On May 12, 1987, Edward Ross used the umbilical cord blood of Evan, the son of a gardener, to cultivate embryos. Margaret suddenly stood up at the long table, and her silver knife clattered onto the bone china plate. She stared at the copy of the experimental record in Claire's hand, her eyes flushed red behind the lenses. Falsification. This is fake. The experimental log from 1945 to 2001. Claire turned to the last page. Green M's signature is exactly the same as the letter Evan found in the study. She turned to Lucas. "You don't have a crescent birthmark on your left wrist, and the real eldest son." In the photo, Ruth walked out from behind the crowd and held up the blurry black and white photo. Margaret dug her fingers into the back of the chair. She suddenly laughed, her laughter like rusty gears. "Just for a gardener's seeds? Edward is crazy. Are you crazy too?" She grabbed the red wine glass on the table and smashed it against the wall. The wine flowed down the tapestry like a streak of dark red blood. Lucas sat at the end. He stared at his left hand. The skin at the wrist bone was smooth and without any marks. The Owen his mother called out before she died suddenly rang in his ears. He remembered that on his 12th birthday his father stared at his wrist for a full 10 minutes and finally said, "My heir should have tougher blood. That's enough." He stood up, his voice as light as a feather. Everyone's eyes swept over. He took off the family emblem on his chest, and the silver rose felt chilly in his palm. "I give up all my rights." The emblem fell on the long table, making a very light ding sound. Margaret's breathing suddenly quickened. She rushed forward to grab the badge but was stopped by Emily. "Aunt," Emily's voice was tearful. "Look at Daddy's diary." "Quiet," Dr. Graham said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The old man, who always had a gentle smile on his face, took off his glasses and put his knuckles against his forehead. He said, "I have been involved in Dr. Green's plan for 30 years. His voice was like sandpaper rubbing against metal. "Edward asked me to add a trace amount of anesthetic to his vitamins, saying that he wanted to test the subject's resistance to toxicity." Claire's pupils shrank. She remembered the sentence in the autopsy report. 6 kinds of toxins combined to cause death. And it turned out that there was a foreshadowing. "I'm not doing this for money." Graham looked up, his eyes red. His ex-wife's death was my misdiagnosis. He used this to threaten me. But later, he clutched the tablecloth. "Those photos of children are all in the back of the cellar." I wanted to stop, but Edward said, "It says the subject must live until he dies." Evan walked in from the door. He held in his hand a half-yellowed piece of letter, the one found in the study. "So he deliberately poisoned each of us, thinking that the experimental subjects could withstand it." He looked at Lucas. "I'm sorry." Lucas shook his head. He walked over to Claire and whispered, "Let's go to the cellar." The iron door of the cellar was badly rusted. Evan fished out the key he had found among the old gardener's belongings and turned it 3 times before pushing it open. The smell of mold and rust came out, and Claire's tactical flashlight swept across the wall. Densely packed photos, from babies in 1945 to teenagers in 2001, each marked with Subject X under it. The last photo is Lucas's 12th birthday photo. Evan crouched in the corner and moved a loose brick. The brass key lay inside, with the word freedom engraved on it, polished to a shine. He handed it to Claire. "You deserve it." "Why?" "Because you exposed all the lies." Evan looked up with light in his eyes, including the truth that I myself don't want to believe. At the press conference 3 days later, Anna stood in front of the sign of the Family Art Fund. She unfolded the document in front of the camera. "From today on, all funds related to the Ross project will be withdrawn." Flashes of light flashed one after another, and her voice was clear and powerful. "We can't change the past, but we can choose how to live." The camera pans across the crowd. Claire stood in the last row, her hands in her pockets, her fingertips touching the brass key. The sunlight shone through the rose bushes, casting golden fragments on her shoulders. She turned and walked towards the manor. The wind lifted the corners of her clothes, carrying a few pink petals. The bells in the belfry rang 12 times, each one clearer than the last. It seemed to be saying that the century-old curse woven with blood and poison was finally about to dissipate, and the new wind is blowing from the sea level in the east. That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.